Hi Anil, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm good. And again, very excited to be speaking to you, Prasant, on camera this time. But very much looking forward to a conversation.
This is so nice to connect with you after almost a year now, and look forward to that great conversation that we've already had off camera, this time on camera.
Looking forward to it.
So Anil, let's start with your early days, right? At one stage you were in college and exploring doctoral options in the US, right? So how the life used to be at that point in time, and how was your doctoral journey?
Yeah, it was actually interesting because I did my MBA from FMS, and most of the people took jobs and started on their careers. I actually did work in India for a year while I was preparing for my doctoral application and things like that. So in that sense, it was a very interesting decision because it meant at least 4 or 5 more years of being a poor student, uh, right? But also quite different in one way because it meant having to study a lot, think a lot, work a lot, and starting a completely different career than what you prepare for as a student. So there was a lot of uncertainty. There was a lot of excitement, of course, as usually is. And then once I got into Cornell, it was tough because there is an incident that I can never forget. The first day, I went to so my minor was economics, so I went to an economics class. And at the end of the class, the professor asked everybody to write the name of their undergraduate institution and the degree they had on the board. And of course, I went there. I wrote my undergraduate was from Kurukshetra universities or REC Kurukshetra at that time. So I wrote REC Kurukshetra. I
Right.
wrote my degree, which was engineering. And then I came back to my seat and started looking, and it was very intimidating because there were people from, all the top schools in the US, and I would say 90% of them had degrees in economics.
Okay.
So, so it was, and an interesting thing was that I took economics as a class in my college, which was actually not much. That was a relatively easy class, but in my MBA, I didn't do well in that class.
Hmm.
So suddenly I look at it and I said, now I'm going to be competing with people who actually went to the top schools in economics, did very well in their economics, and now have come to this class. And here I am, who struggled a lot in my economics class in my MBA, and I have to compete with them. So that was actually, one of those moments where you kind of realize, what am I doing here? Uh,
Hmm.
which was, but also a moment where I know I went back and I said, I need to work at least 2 to 3 times harder than these guys if I want to compete. And I asked one of my senior PhD students about what should I do, and he had a very good suggestion. He said that before you go to any of the class, make sure that you already mastered that chapter
Hmm.
on your own,
Yes.
because that way the class is only for clarifying any doubts you have. That's what I did. I actually would make sure that I had studied that chapter beforehand. I had, worked hard. And then it actually became a very positive experience because that professor had a habit of asking students, okay, what would be the next step? And
Wow.
I
Okay.
so I actually did very well in that class. And I eventually ended up doing 800 level courses, which are the toughest courses that you have of any at the postgraduate level. So it was kind of fun, but it was a very interesting experience right on day one. And subsequent to that, actually, I really enjoyed um, um, reading marketing papers, and so I actually must have read 60-70% of papers that had ever been published by that time. So I used to read, I used to understand them, and worked hard and had really good outcomes because of that.
That's very interesting, right? Because it took almost more than a decade for me to realize that I want to grow in marketing, and you did that via your PhD days. So what was the motivation that engineering to economics and PhD straight away?
I think it was more, there were two, three things. One was I was interested in marketing. It sounded very fascinating as a subject. There was, and also had a good experience with marketing professors at FMS, so that was probably one of the reasons. Then doing a PhD was probably driven more by, I think my dad more than anyone else. He had a
Okay.
PhD, and he was always keen that I do a PhD as well. If he had asked me during my MBA or before that, I would have said no way.
Okay.
I'm not going to be doing it. But I think that played at the back of my mind, and I actually decided to go ahead with it and do that. So that was part of it. Part of it is that it was a hard course. So let's go for it and let's see what happens. So I think those were all different challenges that were coming in. And as I said, this was about 3.5 years that I worked on a PhD, probably the time when I worked the hardest as far as studying was concerned, but also the time that I really enjoyed. Uh, um, you know, really learned a lot. Uh, and it really challenges your mind. You are among the most finest minds in the world.
Hmm.
You have to solve challenging problems. It's kind of fun. I enjoyed it.
That's great. So it looks like a story that doctor ka beta doctor and engineer ka beta engineer wala. That's how you started, but you actually changed after that a lot, right? Uh, you went into that startup ecosystem. Before we go into startup ecosystem, you were in Silicon Valley at that point in time when things were buzzing and technology was being built. So how was it like? How was your day-to-day stories were looking like? Because you saw those days when the technology was being built brick by brick. So if you could just walk me through that time.
Yeah. So now part of what I enjoyed during my PhD program was learning new things, understanding complex stuff, and I think that is the time when the internet was kind of starting to be something. In fact, my first job right after my PhD was at McKinsey, and my manager there, his name was Evan Thornley, on my first project actually. He and I used to discuss a lot of times about what you could do with this thing called internet. And in fact, he went ahead and started a company, actually a search engine,
Okay.
called Look Smart. And he and I discussed so many times about me coming and joining him, but I just wasn't ready to take that risk at that time.
Hmm.
So this idea of starting a company, doing a startup was already there in my mind. But I also had this thing that, I want to learn about business. At that time, I didn't know much about business. So I don't want to do a startup without really understanding the business world. So I spent 4 years at McKinsey. And then I moved from Chicago, that's where I was at McKinsey, to the Silicon Valley area and joined a startup there
Hmm.
and went through the crazy times that were happening at that time, the dot-com boom,
Hmm.
which I do think was super crazy compared to what even you see today.
Okay.
And so the startup did very well. We went through the boom, and then of course we got the taste of the bust, as
Hmm.
well as suddenly, I think in about 2000, April 2000 or so, when our company was actually ready to go public,
Okay.
everything started shutting down. All of our customers were going away. It was a fairly scary period at that time, and that is when I
Hmm.
um, left this company called Personify, which startup that I was at, and decided that maybe we'll start Absolute Data.
Nice, nice. So that was probably the time after a couple of years when this Gary Kasparov versus the Deep Blue thing happened, right? 96, 97, and after
Around
3, 4 years of that. So AI was in infancy, very early days. People were excited that something is happening, computers are beating humans, and this was such a big news. I was like 13, 14. I was in my teens that time, and it would come on newspaper that something like this has happened and computers are taking over. Pretty much same what we hear today, right? AI is taking over and it will do this and that. But there was a long period of kind of the initial stage of technology before it actually became mainstream, right? So you started Absoluta probably around 2001, right?
That's
So
right.
so what was going in your mind, that how did you figure out that this is the space to be in for next few decades?
Yeah, so when we started Absolute, I actually had a fairly good amount of time to do some introspection, thinking, because I was with Personify, and things were, as I said, things were kind of going crazy. It looked like the company which was actually, by the way, valued about 1.8 billion at one point in time,
That
is
time.
not going to make it. So all of that was happening. So that gave me enough time to think through. So, and one of the things that I realized at that time is that I want to be in a space where I know something, where I am bringing something from a knowledge perspective, because that is what I really enjoy. That is where I think I can add value. So, and also at McKinsey, I had already seen the power of data,
Mm.
because a lot of the work that we did, at least the part that I was involved in, the value was coming from the data that we were bringing, and then of course the thinking that we brought on top of that as well. But without data, we would not have been able to do that. In fact, at many of the clients, I would notice that what value we did was we would bring data from two different parts of the company, put them together, and then present some insights and outcomes out of that. And the CEO and the chairman would be, we never knew this could be done, and all of those kind of things. So I think it was that learning that I had, combined with what I really knew how to do well, that resulted in us deciding, let's build absolute data with analytics at that time, and market research being the other piece where there was a lot of survey data that was used at that time. So those two things let's bring together in absolute data at the start of the company.
So basically, I was just reading one of the Shah Rukh Khan interviews, and he says that when you are doing it, you probably don't realize, but when you look back, things start falling in place. So this is probably the time when your engineering plus economics is coming together and kind of creating something very different, which was new at that point in time, right? The
Yes,
analytics part of it.
it was very new. Yeah, most of the companies were not doing a lot of analytics. Even companies that were doing analytics were relatively narrow in terms of the areas that it impacted. And
Hmm.
it was a little bit more focused on more strategic and big decisions
Hmm.
rather than your day-to-day decisions, because it was expensive, and it took time to do it. So the bigger decisions where a lot of analytics were getting used at that particular time. And this is also time when Amazon, Google, the internet
Hmm.
uh, changed the whole interaction, so that you could actually collect a lot of data. At that time, there was not a whole lot of. I think the biggest database at that time that existed was probably in the consumer space. Used to be the retail stores, because they
Hmm.
would have a lot of purchase data. And I think Nielsen was another company which
Yes.
would combine data from a lot of different grocery stores, particularly. So they used to have these huge databases. But rest of the organizations, if you went to rest of the companies, nobody had much data. So the Google, Amazons then suddenly started this data revolution and the technology revolution, which is what the outcomes of what we see today.
It's interesting, right? Doesn't it sound funny that your company, you are in that space? I'm talking about the actual players, for example, retail companies, and there is third party who has all the data available in the market, but you yourself don't have your company's data, which is kind of tricky, right?
Yeah,
And
people didn't value it much. They would just give it away. In
hmm,
fact, if I remember correctly, uh, you know, we today everybody knows about data warehousing technology.
hmm,
I don't know if people know this, that data warehousing technology was initially developed at Nielsen,
okay.
because they were the one of the few companies that had huge databases. So they've developed this technology and they didn't know what to do with it, and they sold it for very cheap to um, Oracle.
Oh,
And
is
then,
it? Okay.
yeah,
Interesting.
I remember that, like, this is sometimes in the 90s.
Hmm.
But because they didn't see the value in it, and they, of course, they were focused on their business. They didn't see, this is something that is going to change the world.
Yeah.
So yes, there was, not a good understanding at that time, and it's very difficult to figure out what the future is going to be. And I think Oracle, of course, then built up a huge company around that, and
Yeah.
plus a lot of other things that they had as well. So yeah.
Yeah, in fact, it is, you're talking about that era where the processing powers were not that high. So even if you have volumes of data, what to do with it? How will it actually get converted into something meaningful? Versus today, it's very
It
different.
used to be, I remember I did one of the first segmentations, customer segmentations in retail.
Mhm.
Way back, I think this is like 1996 or so, for Sears, which was one of the largest, probably the largest retailer at that time in the US or in the world, probably. And it took us so much time to just pull the data together and create customer level records so that we could run that segmentation. And once we did that, of course, there was tremendous amount of value that came out of it because the organization had never seen their customers in that particular way. But I remember it was not an easy. We actually brought in a server, set it up, and we basically pulled flat files from different databases, and they were in the process of setting up their relational database at that time. Yeah, and just created a sample set and ran analysis on that and did a lot of different things on that. Yeah, so it's we've come a long, long, long way from that.
Yeah, pretty cool tech. And nowadays, insights are at your fingertip, right? We talk about self-service analytics, democratization of analytics kind of offerings today. Very interesting. So you started Absolutely in 2001, right? And then obviously the initial years went by, and then came 2008 Lehman crisis, the financial turmoil. So how was it that time for you? Was it like interesting? Was it like exciting, or was it like apprehensive?
It's a interesting question that you're asking because I remember kind of reminiscing about this particular time just maybe like 3 weeks back.
Wow. Okay.
So, and the reason for that was that I think in the 20 years or so that we ran Absolute Data, those 2 years were the happiest years in some ways because, and I'll tell you why. Because the world was shutting down, there wasn't a lot of new business to pick up. People were very happy that they had a job. They were not running around. So you didn't have to spend a lot of time on hiring. You didn't have to spend a lot of time on customer acquisition because there was not a lot happening. So it was kind of, in the world of startups and companies where every day there's a lot of action happening. I think those 2 years were kind of a little quiet, which was a very nice break, actually. So you're like, oh yeah, we remember those 2 years when you would go to office, you would meet everyone very happy and content. You
Nice.
would, we of course continued, we had our clients, we continued working with our customers. So the business did fine. In fact, I remember we as a team took a decision that we will not let anyone go and we will take a salary cut if required as a company. I don't think, except for the top 4 or 5 people, anybody had to take a salary cut, if I remember correctly. But it was not that bad a time. I think it was more of a thing, where nothing much can be done. So let's just kind of go at an easy pace right now till things pick up again. So and part of it probably is, fortunately, our customers didn't reduce their business, did not get impacted tremendously in a bad way, and that helped us to that. But it also set up the foundation, I would say, for the growth that we had after that, because I recall 2009, 10, 11, 12 were like very fast growth years after this was over, and we took our funding in 2012. So I know that we had been growing at a pretty quick pace at that point of time to be able to go out and raise a round of money.
Right. So this kind of feels like when you go for rafting and the instructor asks you to jump, the first leap is like, okay, what is going to happen? And after that, when you float, then it's like you start enjoying the environment, ambience around, and the water thing. Everything starts looking pretty nice, right? The much needed break and joy of being alive.
Yes,
Those
exactly.
kind of days. Very interesting. So I think the next thing is, see, not a lot of founders are marketeers, right? They are either good in product, which could be technology based, which could be non-technology based. They are very good in sales, but you come across as a person who understood marketing. So did you see that benefited you in your entrepreneurial journey? Like, were you able to prioritize brand over sales? Sales is important because you all need fuel, but brand is equally important. So some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think so. One thing was most of our work was in the marketing space, right? So we understood marketing very well, just given our expertise and experience. And then, of course, that translated into what we did with Absolute Data as well. So brand was very important to us. we actually spent a lot of time on branding. And as you know, branding is not just building a logo or putting your name somewhere. It's a much strategic and a much bigger exercise. So branding for us meant not only what our logo looked like. It didn't mean, that our collaterals had to have a particular style. It was about everything in the company, right? How, as a company, do we think of us? How does our client think about us? How does our work reflect that? So yes, so branding was a very important part for us. And the value of that also came very apparent. The value would come in terms of when we would go to our clients, when we would meet different people, we would always be punching a lot above our weight because of what we had done on the branding side, right? And of course, brand without any good work on the back is worth not much. So we made sure that we were doing some really good work. We were doing a lot of innovation. So we won a lot of awards because of that. And those also help you build a brand. And most importantly, ability to attract the right kind of people, right? So at Absolute Data from day one, we had always focused on hiring the best in the market. We used to be day one company at a couple of IITs. I remember being hounded by IIMs for coming to IIMs to hire, and that was because the brand was well known enough, and we were relatively small at that time, that people would want to come and join you. In fact, I think if I look back at it, I've actually had a partner from McKinsey reach out to us and say, he'll be interested in joining us, a couple of people who were partners at Accenture. So that used to be kind of nice to hear. I was like, I know you would like to join, but, we're not that big as yet where we could bring someone like you. But I could, now I'm looking at it, yes, from a branding perspective, it did create an impression of a company that was significantly larger, and it made it attractive enough to even have that conversation. Right? For a lot of startups, attracting talent becomes very difficult because good talent has a lot of options. So how do you stand out? How do you make it worthwhile them having a conversation? And we did that. We hired people from my old company, Absolute Data. We hired people from BCG and a lot of other companies as well because of what the brand had been able to do for us.
Yeah, Absolute Data is an amazing case study if somebody wants to learn marketing. And right from the initial days, as you grew, took the funding, as you grew, became big. So it's a very interesting case study, and I'll probably have a separate discussion with you on that, how it went. But it would be unfair if I let you go without asking you about this one topic, which I learned from you during our time of working together, and it is mental models, right? That's very interesting. And anybody who has interest in marketing or even in sales, if they understand mental models, the life is a lot easier. So a bit on that, please.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, this actually came from my transition where we said, we're doing well on marketing. I need to understand how to do well on sales. And particularly when you are trying to sell a solution that breaks the norm, where you bring innovation in, right? So if you're selling something that people already have been buying for, long time, they know what they want. The challenge is when you have a solution that is different, and hence you have to get people to think in a different way to buy that solution. And this is where the mental model piece comes in, right? So the mental model is essentially how does your customer think about this particular problem? How do they think it should be solved? And how do they typically go about it? Now, if they think in this particular way, then you as a new company, you as a new solution are unlikely to be chosen. So what you have to do is you have to break the existing mental model and get them to adopt a new mental model, a new way of thinking, right? So the first step always is let's understand what is the current mental model. So people might think to solve this particular problem, and you can even think it from generative AI perspective, right? People today think, okay, if I have to do some data analysis I need to build a team, I need to hire a data scientist, and I need to buy a certain software to do that. Now, if I have created a generative AI solution, the first piece will be I have to change their mental model where they say that to solve this problem, I should be using generative AI.
Hmm.
Generative AI solution is not going to be sold because they are going to say, my solution is cheaper, better, this. Yes, but I might not be necessarily just looking at cheaper, better. I already have expertise in this space. I already have, the whole infrastructure for this. And now you're asking me to change. So what you have to do is you have to go and change that mental model where the person says, yeah, the better solution to my problem is going about this way. The moment they agree with that and build up that mental model, you don't have to sell off. The sale happens automatically. So for any startup in particularly that is bringing in innovation, understanding the customer's current mental model and understanding how to change that, which is where marketing plays a very important role because the mental model shift happens through education.
Hmm.
And that education typically happens through content that the marketing team is sharing. Because I can change a mental model of 2 or 3 people by talking to them, but my bigger market I can't have a conversation with directly.
Yeah.
My conversation happens through sharing content, through sharing provocative information to them that gets their attention and says, I want to learn a little bit more about it. And is this the right way for our organization to be going forward? And the moment that starts happening, you're starting to win customers that are not going anywhere else. And I've actually seen this work so well in many of our situations where, I in few situations, I literally can see that moment when that mental model change happened. You can see that glint in the eye of the customer when they see and they get your point of view. And then after that, it's actually a very relatively smooth sales process to making that happen.
Yeah, in fact, if you get into a sales call, the other person always knows the drill, right? You start with A, B, C, and D. The moment you break it, then it's like, okay, now we are talking, and now I want to listen. So suddenly, from a passive listening, you brought him to active listening, and obviously, it requires a lot of back end preparation and clear articulation of your thoughts, like how you want your company to evolve over a period of time, right?
And by the
So,
way, sometimes it needs a lot of courage as well,
absolutely.
because typically the clients aren't looking for a mental model change, right? They're not
Hmm.
looking for a solution. I recall one particular example at a large beverage company here in the US, where they had an RFP. And when we went to the RFP presentation, we were shortlisted in they had shortlisted 5 companies. We told them that the first half an hour, we're going to present something that you don't have in the RFP, because we believe the approach that you have outlined in the RFP for your solution is the wrong way to do it.
Hmm.
And their purchasing guy was very unhappy with that. He kept on pushing me to answer the questions that they had given. And I had to at one point and tell him that, 30 minutes, I'm not going to listen to you. After that, I'll answer the questions because our answers to those questions won't make sense to you if I don't
Hmm.
spend the 30 minutes. So it was a little risky thing, right? We're telling the customer that your RFP is wrong.
Hmm.
But the good outcome out of that was that 8 out of 8 people who were involved in the decision making gave us number one.
Nice.
And they had 2 POCs that they were going to do with 2 different companies. They gave both of them to us, and so on. So unfortunately, COVID derailed that particular RFP because COVID happened right after that. But the fact that we won it
Hmm.
with an approach which was completely different from what the client had asked gave me a lot of confidence about that. Yeah, this is an approach that does work, but it is something where you do have to take risks, right? We
Yeah.
didn't talk about our capabilities. We didn't talk about our people. All of this, we said, this is the way to go. This is how you build it. This is how you go about it. Here are some, data points supporting that this works. And so we have to go into that. And I think for startups and innovative technology, these things are very critical because you're not building something marginally better than what everybody else does. You're making a big leap, and when you make a big leap, you got to be bold enough to be standing there and saying this is how to do it. And 80% of the people, by the way, will not like it, but then who cares? 20% is enough for me as a startup to start building up my company, and will come to that 80% later, because they will then by that time learn, and they will also realize that this is a better approach.
Yeah. Basically, if you keep playing the game the way it is being played, you are number 5 in that list of 5, right? This is more like what Sri Lanka did in 1996 World Cup. Slog hitting up front, and they changed the game, and nobody could adapt in those 30, 45 days. And this was a very different game after that. So startups need to have that thinking and the courage to punch above their weight, as long as they believe in their solution and you had complete command on your solution. Plus this mental model is amazing for everybody. They must spend time on this.
Yes.
So my last question is, nowadays, if you look at kids in their schools, right, 10th, 12th, or in their colleges, the graduation or the engineering or that kind of education system, if we talk about, uh, with AI coming in, with Gen AI coming in, the kind of assignments people are used to do and learn from is now automated, right? You ask ChatGPT and it gives you 5 different versions, and you keep refining it. Your answer is probably the best ever. Huh? So what is your advice that how should they go about planning their career? Because they have good 3, 4 decades of career, whether it in startup or in jobs. How should they think about it now?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And by the way, a tough question to answer, right? Because yes, with generative AI, the world changes quite a bit. How does, as a student, how do you change what you do? I think my sense is there is going to be a bifurcation in how learning happens. And the bifurcation will be in terms of majority of subjects that you're not going to be a specialist in. You will be taking a lot of help from, large language models to get your answers. So you will learn how to use AI to get good answers. So it's not going to be that AI is going to give you the answer, because the answer that AI is going to give you is going to become the base, which everybody has. Right? So the learning will be now, how do I improve it? Which means not only learning how to use AI, but also knowing what's good outcome from AI versus what's bad outcome, right? So you can't, if you don't know what is good and what is bad, what are the characteristics of a good essay versus characteristics of a bad essay, you don't know that what I've got from AI is good or bad. So there is going to be a lot of more abstract learning in that. I think that will be in the areas where you're not specializing. But in the areas where you are going to specialize, you will still have to go back and learn the basics, because till you don't understand the basics, it is very difficult to conceptually understand what is going on. Right? So we talked about economics, right? When I was a PhD student at that time, also you could do a regression on, SAS used to be the big thing at that time. SAS would just run it for you, SPSS would just run it for you. But we still had to go and do all the matrix algebra that is required for multivariate regression, because without that, you could not understand what is collinearity, how does it work, why do you get the response that you get. So you had to, because once you do all of that, that is when you can innovate, that is when you can make it better in that particular field. So I think that is what will happen, is that in some areas we will learn the concepts will be still very important, but how to use those concepts to get a better outcome from AI. And one or two areas will go really deep. We'll do the kind of learning that we still do in those areas. And I think it'll be a combination of it. That's kind of my uneducated guess, if I might call it, about what will happen to learning going forward.
It makes sense. If I think about it, right? What remains same 30 years ago versus 20 years ago versus today is problem solving. The problems will still have to be solved by somebody using whatever tech they want to use. That problem solving ability comes from the basic, as you mentioned. You need to go back to basics, learn the concepts, and be able to figure out new solutions. Otherwise, sales is just about revenue, cost, and profits, right? But still, there are different variables at play. So problem solving is probably something that is going to take prime seat now. And it has always been like that, isn't it? When you go to McKinsey interviews, they ask you to solve problems, case studies. Now you have
Yeah.
more tools. It's not like an advanced calculator on language versus numbers.
Yeah. In fact, if you had asked me the question of what did I learn the most at my PhD, that's what I learned, which is I learned how to take a very, vaguely defined problem, structure it, come up with certain hypotheses, test those hypotheses with data, and get to a solution. And right, so this is what, for example, as you do as a consultant, McKinsey. This is what you do as a startup founder. You are solving problems, but if you don't have that structure or that those tools of how to solve problems, how to take a big problem, for example, break it into smaller pieces, then for each of those smaller pieces, how to solve them and how to bring those solutions together and solve the big problem, right? That's a skill that you can have any kind of tools, and you still will need that. And those things come from, when you, for example, when you learn math, while yes, you do learn how to differentiate an equation, how to integrate an equation and things like that, but you're also learning structural skills, which become very helpful in your day-to-day job where there is no mathematics involved, but you still have to, I have a problem with my HR team or with my team. How do I figure out what is going on and how do I make that into an HR problem versus versus a sales problem versus something else? Those skills become very helpful. And this is where we will have to develop those skills. We'll have to, maybe the focus will become more on developing those skills in colleges and undergraduate than it is today.
Yeah, so basically college can probably skip a part of curriculum and straight away go to the next level, because if you look at the curriculum, some of them are lagging and still not adopted to probably what should be the baseline today in terms of engineering or B schools. Right, absolutely. Makes sense. So thank you so much, Anil. It was great talking to you as usual, and it means a lot. You took out time to feature on Revenue Beacon with Prashant. I'm sure folks who watch this will learn many things, not just about the AI, the data, but also about the importance of brand, how to go about creating a company, how to go about winning the clients, how to change the way problems are perceived, and then going to solve those problems, right? So thank you so much, Anil. Lovely talking to you.
Thank you, Prashant, as well. Always enjoy speaking with you. And, this conversation, of course, has been enjoyable as always. So thank you. And I wish you best of luck going forward.
Thank you so much, Anil.